It's so often what should have happened and didn't, the repair that the nervous system needed and didn't get. Not
Right.
through ill will of the parents, but the mother and the father in the context of the family system, their stories are running and they're not able to meet the child in the way that the child's nervous system needs to be met.
Mark Brayne, welcome back to the Art and Science of EMDR. Thank you for joining us.
Well, as ever, Rotem, it's a great pleasure and always a privilege. It's always fun to meet your community and share ideas with a lot of new friends here today. It's too interesting. The thing about EMDR, and the reason you're all here, is it is the most extraordinary therapy. And I was just saying to Rotem and to Barbara before we opened the meeting that I've just done 4 sold-out workshops, in-person workshops in Australia and New Zealand. And I did 18 live sessions in front of the groups. And I certainly didn't want to wear socks because they were completely being blown off every time. And some of you have heard me say this before. But the thing about working with EMDR, I mean, how many of you have had the experience and in EMDR where you're doing standard protocol, you're doing it the best you can, and suddenly something happens where the client says, "What did you just do? What happened? That was weird." And you know it's working. How many of you have had that experience? Yeah, almost.
Sure.
Yeah, pretty much everybody. The thing about the attachment-informed approach, as some of you know who've done some of my workshops already, hello Deb and people, is that it sort of gives you the tools to cut through the noise. And the thing about talking about this is that you've got your standard protocol, the fundamentals of the attachment-informed approach. You've got your standard protocol. You've got your 8 phases. You've got your 3 prongs. You've got your NCPC, VOC, and phase 3, your assessment, all the architecture of EMDR. But how many times have you sat with a new client, thought, where the hell do I start? What do I do? And when I get there, I remember one of my breakthrough experiences where I thought, whoa, this therapy rocks. It was nearly 20 years ago. It was somebody who was stuck in grief because her husband had died in very, very, very tragic circumstances, and she'd found the body. And I was doing this bilateral stimulation, and she found herself lying down with his dead body, and his spirit came in behind her and spooned the two of them, and then said, "Come, I'm no longer here." And they walked down to the Thames River, and he was wearing her favorite corduroy jacket on him, and she was stuffing cherry blossom flowers into his pockets. And they went down to the river in her imagination as the tappers went. And I think it was eyes closed and buzzers and headphones. I just let it run. And she was telling her story, and he gets into a rowing boat and sets off. They hug. He then gets into the rowing boat and he paddles out into the middle of the Thames in London and goes down. They wave to each other as the tide takes him out. He goes around the corner and it's done. We were both in tears at this point, and I didn't know what to do next. I'd sort of cleared the target. The death was more or less cleared. But I had relatively recently finished my training. I didn't know what to do next. I said, sort of stumbled around and said, sort of see you next week. And that was done. Now, 20 years later, I know very much what to do next to understand this in the context of all of the stories, how she'd found herself in a complicated relationship and sort of not been able to break away from it because he was very dysfunctional in lots of ways. And of course, it sat on her attachment, her need for a particular kind of relationship to make good the wounding of her childhood. But as you know, we all get attracted to the spaces where our wounds get activated. You could argue that relationships that get going between 2 individuals are between 2 individuals who are ideally wounded. That's the understanding of imago therapy. And it is our wounds that attract us. And guess what? In life, our wounds will be activated, but they're not the wounds of trauma. Trauma has been a very useful term for the last 30, 40 years since DSM-3 and trauma and recovery with Judith Lewis Herman in the mid-90s and the idea of trauma-informed care. It's revolutionized the understanding of mental health. But the problem with the word trauma is that it has become a bit of an industry. It has become a kind of catch-all term. Everybody's traumatized. Actually, all of us have childhood experiences. All of us are formed not primarily by trauma, but what I call formative experiences, stuff of childhood. And the fundamentals of attachment-informed EMDR are, above all, target identification. What do I need to target? How do I get there? What do I do when I get there? And how do I structure every single session so I never have an incomplete session? I have
Mark, let me stop you here for
lots
a
of
second.
incomplete targets, but never an incomplete session.
Mark, I want to ask you
Rotor.
about formative experience, which again, I've taken your course, I don't know how many times at this point, and really helped me kind of reshaped how I conceptualize everything in relation to my clients. So can you talk about this a little bit more about these formative experiences? How are they different than what we conceptualize as trauma? Love the way you
Trauma.
say this word. And how is it different from, like a single event in terms of how we conceptualize and how we work, how we do the EMDR work?
Probably the best way I could do this would be to invite everybody to do a joint bridge to illustrate experientially what I mean. This is what I do on my workshops, and it makes very clear the difference between doing a list of bad things that have happened in somebody's life. I mean, if I asked any individual one of you to list the difficult things you'd been through, you'd probably have quite a list. You know, the older you are, probably well, if I asked you how many of them are still live in your nervous system, you may have a slightly shorter list. But if I were to do the classic, which I no longer do, and most, I think, EMDR trainers no longer train this in the same way as they used to, 10 worst memories, that
Right.
for 10 years I used to do that. And you get a kind of an intellectual list. You know what the bad things were. My parents divorced. I was in hospital for a long period because of a difficult illness, whatever it is. And you list the things, the disappointments, the relationship breakups. But the thing is that what is actually driving deep down the way the nervous system deals with the difficult things that happen. And it is not the bad things that have happened, it is the things that have happened, the things that the nervous system has experienced from the moment of conception. And it's not always trauma. An overcaring mother can compromise the capacity of a child turning into a teenager, becoming an adult, to survive in a complicated world where there are disappointments and failures. Things go wrong. But if the nervous system hasn't been conditioned by, it's been overcared for, that's not trauma, but it compromises the nervous system's ability to deal with stuff. If you've got rupture and repair in childhood, how many of you, Rotem, did you have any ruptures in childhood? You don't need to tell me any detail, but of
Yeah,
course you did.
yeah.
Fell off your bicycle, or you've, had a terrible row with your sibling, or some neighbor did some nasty things to you, which you didn't talk about.
Yeah, but I would say it's not just that's what happened, fell off my bicycle, but what happened after, right? Like if
Yeah.
there's care, if
It's
there's
what
a caring parent.
it's often what
Yeah,
didn't happen. We've had these
yeah,
really good discussions on the forum in the community the last couple of weeks. It's so often what should have happened and didn't, the repair that the nervous system needed and didn't get.
yes,
Not
right.
through ill will of the parents, but the mother and the father in the context of the family system, their stories are running and they're not able to meet the child in the way that the child's nervous system needs to be met. So can I do the bridge, Rotim?
Let's do it.
Okay, so what I'd like to invite you all to do, maybe keep your eyes open on this case, but I don't want to activate too many stories. So what I'd like to invite you to do is just, first of all, to think you're coming into EMDR and you've got a very good therapist who is properly trained, working in the standard way, says, what would you like to work on today? What's the sort of trauma that you'd like to work on today? And do feel, by the way, free to put any comments or questions in the chat as we go. Just think to yourself, don't put it in the chat, just to yourself, what you would probably say to your EMDR therapist, this is what I want to work on today. Okay. Can some of you just give me a nod? Just, you don't have to go into it, just thinking, yeah, great. You'll get more out of this exercise if you do think of something. So just take a moment to perhaps just note to yourself, this is what I'd take to therapy. A bad thing had happened, unfinished business. Okay, now my attachment informed question, which is my attachment as lens question, to find out what do we need to look at to look through the lens at the story, is possibly close your eyes now if you feel okay to do that. If you want to keep your eyes open, that's fine. Bring your attention to something in your life that bothers you. Just being, I don't know, maybe with a client, maybe with a partner, maybe with one of your children, maybe with a friend, a colleague, something that bothers you. Just give me a nod when you've got something. Anything at all, just random. And run that as a video in your imagination, either something that's coming up or something that's happening or a trigger point. Run the video and classic EMDR, but not worst moment, but the moment that activates you, that's the trigger point and your story starts running. And if you've got a picture, a moment, a kind of snapshot, a split second moment in space and time, just be curious what you're feeling, what your emotion is right now, or what it would be, and where that's happening in your body or would be happening in your body. And there's going to be a belief about yourself that goes with it, a kind of core belief. It's going to be something like, I'm not quite safe, or I'm not good enough, or I'm going to screw this up, or just notice what belief is running. An old friend. We all have them. Give me a nod when you've got image, emotion, body, belief. Good enough. You got one? Yeah, seeing a few nods. Keeping your eyes closed, now connecting with all of that, drop back in time. Go back as far as you can. First place you land. Very first place you land. If you don't find anywhere immediately, imagine a photo album of your childhood falls open on a random page. If it's still difficult, imagine eagle-eye view soaring over the landscape of your life, looking down the timeline to when you were much smaller. If that fails too, if all else fails, where were you living at 5? Okay, just asking you, those that I can see, how many of you landed on a story that was 18 and over? 12 to, yeah, Elisa, 18 and over. A story sort of 13 to 17, teenage years. Not too many. 8 to 12. Yep, a couple of you. 7 and younger. What we've done, and how many of you landed somewhere where you perhaps wouldn't have expected to go? Wait a minute, why have I landed there? And some of you might have, oh God, I've talked about that in therapy, for the last 10 years. It might be either. But the point is your nervous system, not your left brain, the bridge, which we talked about in the conversations, in the chat, in the last couple of weeks. This is the distinctive difference between the bridge and the float back. Because if I ask you to float back, that's asking your left brain to think. And classic EMDR, to the first time in your life when you felt or experienced that. That's an intellectual question. That's left brain to left brain. The bridge, as we do it here, IEBB, image, emotion, body, belief, and all credit to Laurel Parnell for prioritizing this in her writings. And this is where I learnt to this, what she calls the modified protocol. This is the phase 3. But it's this side of the bridge. And then when you land on the far side of the bridge, you trust where the nervous system has taken us and you fire it up, image, emotion, body, belief, exactly the same way, and you're in. And the nervous system knows much better than the left brain, than just the sort of intellectual understanding or a timeline. The right brain and the limbic system through the bridge know where to start. Rotem, everything else is detail. I mean, there's a lot of detail, a lot of...
Yeah, I'm very curious about it. You changed the order a little, right? You went from image to emotion. That's not what we learn in basic EMDR training. Why are
Yeah.
you doing it like that?
Well, I don't know how many of you had that experience, but Shapiro was a cognitive therapist. She came
Mhm.
from a world that at the time in the late 1980s was very strong on cognitive therapy, that we feel the CBT was beginning to really take off at that time, that what we feel is a result of what we think. Therefore, you change the thinking, the feelings will follow. I think we know in the EMDR world that it's exactly the other way around. We have the feelings which are rooted in how our nervous system deals with stuff. You know, feelings of anxiety, shame, guilt, fear, the core emotions of survival, which are flight, fight, freeze, flop, friend, fawn, not fight, flight, freeze. It's richer, lots of F's. The cascade of emotional response to threat, to fear, is fear first, escape, trying to, I'm out of here. Then, if that's thwarted, anger, which is fight, it fuels fight. If that's thwarted, the nervous system goes into freeze flop. This is polyvagal. This is SNS arousal. This is the polyvagal hierarchy. The nervous system goes into freeze flop, but then behaviorally, friend fawn. A wonderful new book out about fawning. So the nervous system is doing its thing long before the thoughts kick in. So if we go image, emotion, body, belief, by the time we get to belief, it's an organic left brain, right brain. It's I feel helpless. I feel out of control. I feel incapable. I feel a failure. So those you know from your EMDR training are actually cognitions. So they
Mhm.
strictly speaking, you know, that's not a feeling. I'm helpless. That's you correct your client. Here we don't correct our clients. We very subtly lead clients for all the domains of emotion, somatic, and cognition. And the cognition flows from the emotion and the body and the image. And we're in. I think this is the future of EMDR. I think, you know, there are presentations absolutely where NCPC, VOC, emotions, SUDS, body go is absolutely right. But to make that a one size fits all for all presentations, I think is actually yesterday's and also Shapiro's formal early formational agenda. And
It's
the, yeah, Barbara, how's
yeah, I
this
was
landing with you? We're meeting for the
yeah.
first time today. Yes.
Yeah,
So,
so it's landing really well. I so appreciate you bringing in Shapiro's background and how she was that scientist mind. I do have a question of curiosity, Mark, about assessing, because in basic training, we are teaching about getting your SUDS and your VOC. So I love this setup. It feels so organic. When do you do the traditional phase 4, check for a SUDS when you get to neutral and positive? So you're still checking for that. You just don't set it up in phase 3. Is that correct?
that's correct. Phase four, I'm a complete fan of the eight
Right.
phase fundamental structure of EMDR. I think that was genius. It's a wonderful legacy, and it gives. I'm autistic, by the way. Some of you know this. Late diagnosis, Asperger's. You know what used to be understood as high functioning Asperger's. So I see structure. I need to see patterns. That's how my brain works. And
Mhm.
when I was watching Laurel Parnell working brilliantly, I could see the sort of architecture. I could see the skeleton of what she was doing. I brought her over to the UK several times and was inspired by the way she teaches. And I needed to categorize it to actually sort of work out why and how is this working? What's the structure?
Mhm.
And I realized that by leaving the positive cognition and the numbers, which are all left brain, out of
Mhm.
phase three, but bolting them in, bringing them in at the end of phase four as we go from phase four into installation, tapping it in. I mean, there's a lot of terminology in EMDR, which is way past its sell by date. Installation, you know, we know what we mean, but don't talk about a client. Think you're installing a computer piece of software in their brain or something. But what I do at the end of phase four, when I shade into phase five, is I
Mhm.
use the SUDS to check, is there any distress left on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is 10. You know, that's when I ask. And it's
Mhm.
organic. It's incredibly powerful there. And then, okay, so now we've got it down to a 1. Or sometimes we're firing feelings up. We're accessing story. We're lighting up the stage and there's more feeling around, but it's healthy grief feeling. It's process. It's good feeling, not stuck feeling.
Yeah.
It's changing. How distressing does this feel now in
Mhm.
an unhealthy way, a stuck way? And often people will say, to their own surprise, well, it's sort of zero. You can use that to check it's great. And
Mhm.
then you can say, well, what's the belief about yourself now? We started out with, I'm helpless. What about now? Oh, I feel okay. I feel pretty powerful. Yeah. On a scale, let's just use a scale. So I bring it in kind of conversationally, organically, not we've got
Yeah,
to do it by the standard protocol at the beginning
yeah,
of, in phase three.
yeah.
Does that make sense, Barbara?
It makes such sense how organic it is. So while I can appreciate what Shapiro is teaching in the traditional phase three, I feel like this evolution to profoundly trust the process, to profoundly trust that the client's nervous system will take them to healing and wholeness. Why do we actually have to get it? So I really appreciate that. And I too, I see that all the time, Mark, where it's happening just like that. I don't have to ask, it just is.
Yeah.
And in a traditional phase three, we're asking for that positive cognition. But what do we do when we get to phase five? We're
It often
asking
changes.
exactly, right?
The thing about phase three, doing the numbers and the positive cognition in phase three, we actually so often, how many of you have had the experience? You're firing the story up in phase three, and the whole air goes out of the balloon, the
Yeah,
rocket leaks
yeah,
fuel,
yeah,
and the
yeah,
launch fails
yeah.
because
With
you
you.
lose the affect, you lose the power, you lose the focus.
Right,
Yeah. And
right.
I think, Barbara, this is intensely in accordance with the standard protocol, with
I
the
agree.
standard procedural steps as they need to be understood. And just one thought, I don't know how many of you were on the call just a couple of hours ago with the EMDRIA team and Michael Boas and the new branding of EMDRIA.
Yeah, I
I
can't
have
wait.
to say, I was quite excited. I'm EMDRIA approved consultant and, credit provider, not a trainer. I don't want to train basic protocol. I'll leave that basic train. I'll leave that to others. I like to pick
Leave it
people
to
up
other
once they've got the
people.
Hey,
basics.
Do
I
your
do
thing.
that.
Much prefer doing the advanced stuff. Well, okay, you've learnt the basics, right? You've learnt the basics of the grammar of the language. I'll teach you to write novels rather than just do Jack and Jill went up the hill. And what was exciting, Barbara, really warming about Michael Boas and his team relaunching EMDRIA with a new brand and a new focus. I can't remember because we haven't had the presentation sent out yet, but there were sort of four headings for what EMDRIA is trying to do in this new world. And one of them is absolutely take EMDR forward.
Yes.
And I think opening a space where we can bring our experience on the front
Yeah,
line of practice informed
yeah,
EMDR,
yeah.
that we know what works.
We're there. We're doing it.
And
We're the
let's
one
just pool
in,
this.
yeah, in the pivot to be experimental. Like, what have I got to lose? I remember a moment where I was really stymied with a client who gives me permission to talk about her conversion disorder trauma complex. And so I'm a sand player as well. So I was like, would you like to do something in the sand? And then began my EMDR and sand connection. So,
Tapping as they look at their
yeah,
story set out
exactly,
with the
exactly,
figures on the sand. And then you just tap it and you consolidate it and you bring
exactly.
EMDR tools to
Right.
that work that you're already really good at. Yeah,
But
100%.
we're in the front line doing it and needing to be responsible to the moment and treasuring the moment.
Yes.
We're here, like this crowd of 60 odd people. We are the future of EMDR. And Mark, what you're bringing with AI EMDR just opens my heart so much. And I wanted to check in about the SUDS and VOC. It's the classic traditional, when you get too neutral positive, go check it out. It was disturbing,
Well,
but there was a 9 or a 10.
another really important aspect of attachment informed EMDR is I practice. And by the way, I don't teach anything that I don't use. I only teach what I find works on the front line. I don't
Yeah.
teach theory for its own sake. Another fundamental complementary understanding of EMDR in when we work this way is you don't wait for two positives or two neutrals. And you don't just change the direction of the eye movements. I tend not to use eye movements. I do most of the work with eyes closed and tappers and headphones. I work mainly online, almost exclusively online these days. So it's mostly headphones with eyes closed. But we don't just wait for the traditional, nothing's happening, so what do I do now? I go back to target.
More
We
proactive.
work much more proactively with the actual story
Yeah.
that the client is bringing about their formative experience as if for real. So the metaphor I use, and I have a very, very vivid imagination. I go into my clients' childhoods with them. I have
Mhm.
a generic kitchen where all my clients have their mothers fit. I have a generic front room that's it's a two up and two down cottage in the north of England. Why? I don't know. But it works for me. So I'm co-imagining with my client what they're remembering. And we go into the story because the point of, let's not talk about it, let's not call it trauma, the unfinished business, open gestalts, if any of you are trained in gestalt therapy, unfinished business from childhood where an old story is still running. It's the presenting past, if you like, and I bridge from a future fear, a present trigger, a pervasive feeling. So there's lots of things you can bridge from in the here and now where the past is presenting itself.
Mm-hmm.
The point about this, and Shapiro talks about the presenting past in some of her writing, is that the past is relevant because it isn't the past. The nervous system thinks it's still happening.
Yeah.
So it's responding with survival-informed emotion and behavior that was learnt sometimes decades ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, a long time ago when it was adaptive, it was necessary for survival to keep the infant, the child, connected to primary caregiver, without whom the infant was a hyena's lunch 200,000 years ago on the plains of Africa. So this is not theoretical. We're going in with our clients and finding stories that are still running for real. So we find literal stories, whether remembered or not, because the body remembers them. The body keeps the score, not just as a scorecard, but the body is still acting the stories as if they're running now. So when our clients get triggered, how many of you here get triggered by things that happen? Right. Each time that happens, if it isn't literally a saber-toothed tiger or a political situation which just pisses you off beyond measure, of which there are quite a few at the moment, if it's your stuff, something activates with you, it's an old friend. It's an aspect of yourself. I don't like to talk about parts too strongly, but it's an aspect of you that is running an old program, if you like. You're still running on Windows 3.1, or if you're probably all Apple users, I don't know, on sort of Apple 6 or whatever it's called on Windows. But your software is running an old version of the software. And what do we do with our computers? We upgrade our software. We do that regularly. EMDR is the ultimate software upgrade. And so we go in with attachment-informed EMDR. We understand the childhood formative experiences as actual stories that we turn up in our metaphorical DeLorean outside the childhood home. We find little Barbara or little Cheryl or little Nicole or little Nancy. Hey, kid, what's happening? And the child ego state, various terms for it, will tell you, often through the language of feeling and imagery and narrative, not cognitions. And so often in EMDR, we have to quieten our clients, S apostrophe, our clients' left brains, their intellectual, their analytical self, shut them up. We have a term in English, shut the bugger up, cut them off at the pass. Don't let them talk too much. So clients can talk as much. I mean, try and stop me, by the way, in EMDR. It's like stopping a flipping super tanker. I go on and on and on. But if I was your client, you would have to stop me in my tracks and say, Mark, whoa, hang on, stop. What's happening? Let's go back to that moment at 10 when you rescued the family and you were the hero of the family, and actually your mother was completely irresponsible and took you the wrong side of a creek at low tide, which then flooded and you all nearly died. Let's just go back to that moment. How is that now? Because we've just done a piece of work on it. I did a piece of work. That is a literal story. That's my formative story when I was the hero of the eldest child. I don't need to tell you too much of my personal story. But, if I go off on one, stop me. Let's go back to target. When in doubt, go back to target, but make sure your target is attachment informed and not just the bad thing that happened. How many of you, Barbara and Rotem, you will have worked with survivors of sexual abuse in childhood, as we all have? Do you know, I would say it's almost never the sexual abuse that's the problem. I mean, it's a bad thing. You can target it. It's the response of the system to what happened. Was it safe to tell anyone?
Or lack of
Or
response,
lack
I would
of, exactly.
say, right?
The
The
quality.
kid comes back home and the parents are too busy and they're not even noticing that something changed where something clearly changed.
Or how could you say that about your uncle? He's such a nice man. Or that priest I stood in the dock nearly 20 years ago now for a client, a fellow journalist who'd been sexually abused by a priest at his school when he was 10. And he reported it, as a consequence of the work we were doing. He took it to first the Catholic Church, and they were a bit superficial. They sort of were friendly, but no, getting nowhere. So he took it to the police.
Mhm.
This 80-year-old priest went on trial, and I stood in the dock. And well-meaning, his father had died with alcoholism a few years earlier. So he was a single child of a single mum who was locked into the Catholic story. He could never tell her that the priest was doing something that really distressed him. The priest got off, by the way, because this was 2007. I don't think he would have got off these days. But it's the response, it's what didn't happen, or the quality of the
Right.
attachment context
Right.
that is actually the story that we end up working on. So the sexual abuse, of course we target that. Of course we target and work with the trauma. But what happens is that the actual underlying nervous system reset that takes place is almost always about the attachment story. And what's really important, we never put any mother on trial. Fathers, I'm not so sure about. But mothers, many of you are mothers. Most of us had mothers. I would say that no mother, all mothers do their best. And sometimes it's catastrophically inadequate. But I think all mothers do their best, actually. But maladaptive, big time. So we get in there and I'm also, by the way, the trouble is, they press the go button on me, I never stop. But one of the things that some of you know me well enough, and you're smiling very, very widely there, Vita. You know me, I just don't stop. But the thing about the attachment informed or attachment focused approach, lots of you will know Laurel Parnell's amazing work. She's a great therapist and a great trainer. The danger with her approach, or trainees who go on her trainings or on mine, is that you can come away and think, what we need to do is have a good team, an ideal mother and a resource team who are going to make it all okay. That's not the work. That's where Shapiro was right. It's AIP. You stick with the capacity and desire of the nervous system to heal, which is what it wants to do. If you go in too quickly to fix it, you actually stop the healing process.
I want to let our members know that cohort 4 is now open, so you can join Mark's 4th cohort. And this is a 10-week course, so we are officially opening it on May 11th with recorded modules. So 1 week you get recorded module, and then the next week we are meeting for 2 hours to do some practice and demos and answer some questions. So first, I want to say thank you, Mark, and thank you for Barbara for joining me.
Thank you.